Hello, my name is Steve Kaufman, and I've written a book that has the same title as this video. And that's because both the book and this video have the same purpose, which is to give people the opportunity to become aware of what they really are by understanding how they got here. Now, here you might say, I know what I am, and I know how I got here, so I don't need some idiot on YouTube that I've never heard of telling me what I am and how I got here. And my response to that would be, if you're a human being living somewhere in the vicinity of the year 2023, which is when this video is being made, then it is almost certainly the case that you have absolutely no idea of what you really are and of the situation that you have placed yourself in as a result of being born human. And that's because at this point in time, almost all human beings still believe that physical reality is the reality that's actually there where it appears to be, even though physical reality is not the reality that's actually there where it appears to be, because what physical reality actually is just a mind generated appearance that's being projected onto the reality that is actually there. And because physical reality is just a projected appearance and not the reality that's actually there, mistakenly believing physical reality to be the reality that's actually there has converted that physical appearance into a delusion that is obscuring from your awareness the reality that is actually there where physical reality appears to be. And because the reality that's actually there where physical reality only appears to be is the reality that you really are, having the reality that's actually there continuously obscured from your awareness means that your own reality is being continuously obscured from your awareness. The exact same sort of obscuring happens if, for whatever reason, you mistakenly believe what is only a reflection to be the reality that's actually there. Because if that happens, your mistaken belief in the nature of the reflection converts that reflection into a delusion that obscures from your awareness the mirror that's actually there where the reflection only appears to be. And the exact same sort of obscuring happens because there's a mirror reflection type of relation that exists between the reality that's actually there, where physical reality appears to be, and physical reality as a mind generated appearance. So that mistakenly believing the physical appearance to be the reality that's actually there has the same effect as mistakenly believing a reflection to be the reality that's actually there. And that same effect is that the mistaken belief in the appearance as being the reality that's actually there converts what is only an appearance into a delusion that then has the ability to obscure from your awareness the reality that is actually there, where the delusional appearance alone now appears to be. And because you're almost certainly at this point continuously rendering yourself unable to become aware of the reality that you really are as a function of mistakenly believing that what are only mind generated physical appearances are realities that are actually there, it is almost certainly the case that at this point you are not aware of what you really are or of the situation that you have placed yourself into. Instead, what you are aware of both yourself and the universe as being is some set of mind generated physical and mental appearances that have nothing to do with what either you or the universe really are, but have only to do with the experiential appearances that you are left to mistakenly know both yourself and the universe as being once you have completely obscured the reality that you really are from your awareness. In essence, by being born a human being, you had the mother of all VR headsets placed over your awareness. And that mother of all VR headsets is what you call your mind. And your mind produces two related and yet distinct types of appearances, one of which is the externally projected appearance that you are aware of as physical reality, and the other of which is the internally reflected appearance that you are aware of as mental reality. And because throughout your whole life, physical reality has appeared to be what's actually externally there, because your mind is a VR headset that you can't take off, at least while organically alive, you naturally came to believe physical reality to be the reality that's actually there. And your mind is using that false belief in the nature of physical reality to continuously convert what is only a mind generated physical appearance into a delusion that is continuously obscuring from your awareness the reality that's both actually there and what you really are. And so, to be clear, physical reality, which only appears to be what's actually there, and the reality that is actually there, are two completely different types or kinds of realities that have a reflection mirror type of relation with respect to each other. And since the difference in relation between those two types of realities is the primary thing that needs to be understood in order to understand the nature of reality and the situation that we're in, let's separate a reflection from the mirror in which it exists so that we can make completely clear the relation that exists between physical reality as a created appearance and the reality that's actually there where physical reality appears to be, as well as what happens when the former is mistakenly believed to be the latter. So on the left, we have a reflection, which is a type of created appearance that, as an appearance, has the ability to appear as a reality that's actually there and so can be mistaken for being the reality that's actually there. And on the right, we have a mirror, which, relative to the reflection, is the reality that's actually there where the reflection only appears to be, and upon which type of reality and appearance can be superimposed. Now here's the situation that we're in. Human beings believe that physical reality is the type of reality shown on the right, because human beings have always believed and continue to believe that physical reality is the reality that's actually there. But what I'm saying is that although human beings firmly believe that physical reality is the type of reality shown on the right, what physical reality actually is the type of reality shown on the left. Because what physical reality actually is just a mind-generated appearance that's being superimposed upon the reality that's actually there, where physical reality, as a mind-generated appearance, only appears to be. And because there's a mirror reflection type of relation that exists between the reality that's actually there and the mind-generated physical appearance that's being superimposed upon that reality, our mistaken belief in physical reality as being the reality that's actually there has caused the reality that is actually there to be completely and continuously obscured from our awareness, in the exact same way that a mirror gets obscured from your awareness if you believe a reflection that exists within it to be what's actually there, even though you still have to be looking right at the mirror or you couldn't be aware of the reflection. And because the reality that's actually there is the reality that we really are, mistakenly believing physical reality to be the reality that's actually there, which obscures from our awareness the reality that is actually there, has the effect of obscuring from our awareness the reality that we really are, leaving us with no choice but to become and remain mistakenly aware of both the universe and ourselves as being a type of reality that neither it nor we actually are, which then leaves our awarenesses effectively trapped in the type of reality shown on the left, even though our awarenesses are the type of reality shown on the right. And our awarenesses are effectively trapped in the type of reality shown on the left, which is the reality of appearances, because every reality that human beings are presently aware of as being something that is in some way, shape, or form a reality that's actually there is actually the type of reality that's just a created appearance that's being superimposed upon the completely obscured reality that's both actually there and what we really are. And also what everything else really is as well, beyond the physical appearance. More specifically, there are three kinds of experiential realities of which we are aware: physical, mental, and emotional. And for the vast majority of human beings, those are the only realities they are aware of, and so those are all they know is real. And yet, the fact is, those realities are all the kind of reality that's just a created appearance. And so none of them is a reality that's actually there, or each appears to be. But human beings don't know that, because mistakenly believing those appearances to be realities that are actually there has the effect of obscuring from our awareness the reality that is actually there, and so creates the delusional appearance that those realities are all that is real. And as long as human beings continue to mistakenly believe that the experiential realities are realities that are actually there, human beings will continue to have the reality that's both actually there and what they really are obscured from their individual awarenesses, leaving those individual awarenesses effectively trapped in mind-generated experiential environments where they have no choice but to know themselves as realities that they are not, and leaving them suffering tremendously as a result. And so, just to be clear, I'm not saying there's nothing there where physical reality appears to be. I'm just saying that the reality that is actually there is not a physical reality, nor is it a mental reality, because mental realities are just a different sort of mind-generated appearance. And so being able to kick a chair or being able to grab and hold on to what appears to be a physical object does not in any way prove that physical reality is the reality that's actually there, for the simple reason that there is more than one way to explain why you're able to do those things. One explanation is that physical reality is indeed the reality that's actually there and that I am completely full of shit. And the other explanation is that physical reality is not the reality that's actually there, but it's just an appearance that's being superimposed upon the reality that's actually there. And that what you are really interacting with when you kick a chair or pick up an object is the reality that's actually there and not the physical reality that only appears to be there. For example, if someone projected the image of a painting on a wall, it would appear that there was actually a painting there, where there is actually only a wall upon which an appearance is being superimposed. That is, that projected appearance, because it is an appearance, can appear to be what's actually there, and so can be mistaken for being what's actually there, even though it's not what's actually there, because what's actually there is the wall upon which the appearance is being projected. And if for some reason you decide to go up and touch the painting that you mistakenly believed to actually be there, you would come into contact with something, and you would then naturally believe that what you had come into contact with was a painting that you mistakenly believed to be there. But what you would really have come into contact with is the wall that's actually there, where the painting, as a projected appearance, only appears to be. And in the same way, because we naturally and yet mistakenly believe physical reality to be what's actually there, when we reach out and make contact with one of those physical appearances, we naturally believe that what we have made contact with is the physical reality that we mistakenly believe is actually there, when what we have really made contact with is a structured form of the non-physical, non-mental, non-experiential reality that's actually there, where the physical reality only appears to be. So there is something there where physical reality appears to be, it's just not a physical something. And that's because what's actually there, where any sort of physical object appears to be, including your physical body, is a structured form of the ultimately formless non-physical reality that you really are, upon which your mind is projecting a created physical appearance, thereby causing you to mistakenly believe that physical appearance to be what's actually there. And that mistaken belief in the nature of physical reality causes the physical appearance your mind is producing to function as a delusion that obscures from your awareness the ultimately formless reality that's actually there, where physical reality alone now appears to be, and so obscures from your awareness the ultimately formless reality that you really are, leaving you with no choice but to become mistakenly aware of yourself as being a reality that is only an appearance, because appearances are all that you're left aware of as long as the reality that's actually there remains completely obscured from your awareness as a function of your mistaken belief in those appearances as being realities that are actually there. Now, our minds evolved to generate a physical appearance for the same reason that VR headsets are programmed to produce the appearance of a virtual wall where a wall may actually exist. And that reason is to provide your awareness with information that in some way correlates with the actual environment in which you are operating while wearing the headset. And if you had a VR headset placed on your head the moment you were born that you were never able to take off, you would likely come to mistakenly believe that the virtual wall being produced by that VR headset is the reality that's actually there. Because when you would reach out to touch that virtual wall, you would encounter the unseen wall that's actually there, which would then seem to confirm the accuracy of what is your natural and yet mistaken assumption and conclusion regarding the nature of the virtual wall as being the reality that's actually there. And human beings have come to the same sort of natural and yet mistaken assumption and conclusion regarding the nature of physical reality as a result of being born into bodies that possess minds that cannot help but produce, project, and so superimpose a physical appearance upon the structured environment that's actually there, where physical reality, as a projected appearance, only appears to be. Now, here I can imagine someone saying, so what if physical reality isn't the reality that's actually there? Human beings have clearly done pretty well despite mistakenly believing physical appearances to be realities that are actually there. And my response to that would be it is true that human beings have done quite well with respect to learning how to manipulate and mold the structured environment in which we are operating, even while mistakenly believing that environment to be composed of what is only a mind generated physical appearance. And we have done quite well in that regard because what we are aware of as physical reality is a sort of mind generated etching of certain structural aspects of the reality that's actually there. And so the physical appearance does correlate in some way with the structured environment that's actually there where physical reality appears to be. And the physical appearance correlates in some way with the structured environment that's actually there because one of the things our minds evolved to do was to form a specific type of relation with structures that exist external to our minds in order to provide our awarenesses with information that in some way corresponds to the structured forms of ourself that are actually there where any physical reality only appears to be. And so, yes, it's true that human beings have done quite well with regard to learning how to manipulate certain aspects of the structured environment in which we are operating, despite our having no awareness whatsoever of the actual nature of that environment due to our mistaken belief in physical reality as being the reality that's actually there. But it is equally true that psychologically, human beings by and large have been and continue to remain an absolute fucking mess. And we're getting more messed up by the day as more and more human awarenesses become more thoroughly and deeply trapped within mind generated experiential realities that bear increasingly less and less relation to any situation, circumstance, or reality that actually exists anywhere other than in their own minds. For the simple reason that those awarenesses continue to have no awareness whatsoever of the reality that's actually there, and so no awareness whatsoever of the reality they really are, thereby leaving them with no choice but to tunnel deeper and deeper into what are completely delusional realities as they desperately seek to find a way out of the psychological suffering that being trapped in those delusional realities inevitably produces. And human awarenesses continue to have no awareness whatsoever of the reality that's both actually there and what they really are, for the simple reason that human beings continue to believe that what are only mind generated experiential appearances are realities that are actually there, thereby causing their minds to continuously convert those appearances into delusions that then have the ability to hide from their awarenesses the reality that is actually there. Because it just so happens that the reality that's actually there is also the reality that we really are, obscuring from our awareness the reality that's actually there has the effect of obscuring from our awareness the reality that we really are, which then leaves our individual awarenesses effectively trapped in mind generated experiential environments where we then have no choice but to know both ourselves and the universe as a type of reality that neither we nor it actually are. And we suffer tremendously as a result. The point here is that humanity's mistaken belief in physical reality as being the reality that's actually there is not cost neutral, but comes with a heavy cost. Because all the human misery, all the suffering, all the selfishness, all the greed, all the violence, all the hatred, basically all the truly negative stuff, has as its basis the fact that we continue to have no awareness whatsoever of what either we or the universe really are, leaving us with no choice but to continue to act in the world on the basis of completely delusional ideas regarding both our nature and the nature of the universe. Look how far we have come materially in the past couple of thousand years, and yet psychologically we have not moved an inch, as we remain the same sort of suffering assholes now that we were way back then, if not more so. It is not coincidence that human history is primarily a story of technological advancement and interpersonal conflict. And that's because while the invention of science allowed us to become very good at manipulating external reality, and so made it possible for us to dramatically improve one aspect of our existence, science has so far not been able to present us with a description of reality that bears any relation whatsoever to the actual nature of reality, but instead continues to present us with a description of reality that continues to obscure from our awareness the reality that's actually there, and so continues to obscure from our awareness the reality that we really are. And science is doing that because science is composed of scientists who are human beings. And human beings, almost without exception, are trapped in a mind generated experiential delusion as a function of believing physical reality to be the reality that's actually there. leaving scientists, just like everybody else, completely oblivious of the reality that's both actually there and what they really are. And that has left scientists with no choice but to try to explain reality in terms of what are only projection and reflection like appearances that are being produced by a reality that they don't even know is there. And it just can't be done, at least not accurately, which is to say, in a way that bears any resemblance to the actual nature of reality. And so, contrary to popular belief, we presently do not live in an age of scientific enlightenment that has revealed to us the true nature of reality. Because what we're really doing is living in what is just a more technologically advanced version of the Dark Ages, where we continue to have no idea whatsoever of what either we or the universe really are. And that's because all we've done since science came on the scene is replace our mistaken set of pre scientific religious beliefs regarding the nature of reality and ourselves with what is an equally mistaken set of scientific beliefs regarding the nature of reality and ourselves, leaving us psychologically in the exact same situation we were in before science came along. And that situation is that we are continuously obscuring from our awareness the reality that we really are as a function of what is nothing more than a mistaken belief, thereby leaving us with no choice but to continue to act in the world on the basis of completely delusional ideas regarding both our nature and the nature of the universe. The great irony is that some religious beliefs regarding the nature of reality are more accurate than our present day scientific beliefs regarding the nature of reality, because those religious beliefs at least included the idea that there is a more fundamental reality that exists beyond physical reality. Science, on the other hand, continues to maintain that physical reality is what's actually there and is all there is, and so has taken the position that any other non physical phenomenon or reality, such as consciousness or awareness, must somehow be produced as a function of physical reality. Again, science excels at the manipulation of external reality because physical reality, while not being the reality that's actually there, is not completely unrelated to certain structural aspects of the reality that's actually there. And science's outstanding level of performance in that regard has created the false impression that science, to a large extent, understands the nature of reality. But science excels at the manipulation of external reality not because it has even the slightest clue regarding the actual nature of reality, but only as a function of the utility of the scientific method, combined with the fact that physical reality is not completely unrelated to certain aspects of the reality that is actually there, thereby allowing one to use physical facts to manipulate external reality in a predictable way, regardless of what one believes those facts indicate with regard to the nature of reality. In the book, I compare science as it is presently operating to someone who is so good at driving a car that they win every race they enter, even though they have no real understanding of how the vehicle they are driving actually functions as a mechanism. But because they win every race, both they and the spectators mistakenly believe the person driving the car actually knows how the mechanism they are so expertly driving operates. The point here is that science may be very good at turning the wheel of what appears as physical reality in order to make the structured forms of the reality that's actually there go this way or that, but it presently has no idea whatsoever with regard to what's actually going on under the hood to make that happen, because the reality that science believes is actually there, causing everything to happen, is just an appearance that's being produced by the reality that is actually there, causing everything to happen. Now, I'm not pointing this out to bash science or scientists, because scientists have done the best they could to explain the nature of reality while operating from within an experiential delusion, where they have been effectively forced to treat what is only an appearance as if it were the reality that's actually there. Instead, I'm pointing all this out to provide some context for understanding how it is that after all this time, and with all the scientific advancements that have been made, that humanity could still remain so utterly and absolutely clueless regarding both the nature of reality and ourselves. And we remain utterly and absolutely clueless regarding both the nature of reality and ourselves because for as long as we have been around, we have been making the same fundamental mistake. And that fundamental mistake is mistaking what is only a mind generated appearance for being the reality that's actually there, and in so doing, obscuring from our awareness the reality that's both actually there and what we really are. And the emergence of science did not change that situation. If anything, the emergence of science has aggravated that situation because science continues to present and treat that mistaken belief as if it were some sort of verified and established fact that cannot and should not be questioned. And so, no, I'm not giving science or scientists shit for not figuring out the nature of reality and instead coming up with a bunch of materialistic bullshit that doesn't even come close to being an accurate description of the nature of reality, because that's the only thing they could possibly do while continuing to operate within an experiential delusion, where they are effectively forced to treat the unproven assumption of physical objectivity as if it were an established fact. And scientists have been effectively forced to treat the unproven assumption that physical reality is in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there as if it were an established fact, because while operating from within a delusion, the mistaken belief that is being used to create the delusion becomes inseparable from the delusion. And so, from within the delusion, that mistaken belief appears as an established fact rather than just the unproven belief or assumption that it actually is. And as a result, the false belief or mistaken assumption that's being used to create the delusion never gets questioned, because who's going to question something that appears to be so obviously and unquestionably true? However, that being said, what I will give science and scientists a massive amount of shit for is for continuing to insist upon treating what has only ever been an assumption of physical objectivity or physical realism as if it were an established and unquestionable fact, when it's not a fact, because it's just an unproven assumption. And as a result, failing to even consider the possibility that that assumption is not only unproven, but is also completely inaccurate, even though they have already spent more than 100 years analyzing and interpreting the appearance of physical reality at the quantum level solely within the context of the unproven belief and assumption that physical reality is in some way, shape, or form the reality that is actually there, and still have no real explanation whatsoever for why physical reality appears and behaves as it does at the quantum level. Now, here I can imagine someone saying, but scientists have explained why physical reality appears and behaves as it does at the quantum level. And it's because physical reality, prior to being observed, exists in a probabilistic state. And then when that probabilistic physical reality is observed, the act of observation in some completely unknown way somehow transmutes that probabilistic physical reality into a determinate physical reality. And all I can say about that explanation is this: when you have to include in your explanation something that is itself completely and utterly inexplicable, such as the act of observation functioning as a sort of magic wand that in some completely unknown and inexplicable way somehow transmutes a probabilistic reality into a determinate reality, you really haven't explained anything, because all you've really done is create the appearance and so illusion of an explanation while simultaneously creating an insoluble conundrum that is then kicked down the road for the next generation to waste its time trying to solve. The first rule of science, at least as far as I'm concerned, is to separate unproven assumptions and beliefs from established facts, regardless of how long those assumptions have been in play and regardless of how much you believe or want them to be true. Because if you don't, and instead treat what are only unproven assumptions and beliefs as if they were established facts, and they turn out to be completely inaccurate, then you end up where we are now, which is effectively trapped in a mind generated experiential delusion, believing we know just about everything that's going on, that we just need to work out a few of the details, when we actually don't have the slightest clue about what's going on or what reality actually is. Because all we really know is a reality that's just a created appearance that's obscuring from both our individual and collective awareness the truly fundamental reality that's actually there, both creating and aware of all the experiential appearances. I love science. I'm all about science. I was trained as a scientist and continue to make my living functioning in a science-based profession. I'm all about establishing facts and then using those facts to play the game of mental connect the dots that we refer to as conceptualization. It's just that I stopped believing at a relatively early age that physical reality was definitely the reality that's actually there, and so was able to stop treating the unproven assumption of physical objectivity as if it were an established fact. And since it seemed to me that science had hit a wall with regard to understanding the nature of reality based on its materialist approach and philosophy, I decided to try to connect the physical dots in a different way, based on the opposite assumption. and so spent the last 40 years using the same physical facts that most other scientists have been using to confuse themselves about the nature of reality to try to figure out how a formless awareness could operate to produce what we are aware of as the various physical, mental, and emotional experiential realities. And although it did take a while, I was finally able to figure it all out. Because as it turns out, reality beyond the physical appearance is not all that complicated. There's just a single, indivisible, formless reality forming a series of progressive relations with itself as a function of its movement in relation to itself, analogous in a very limited way to what happens to a rubber band that's twisted repeatedly upon itself. Now, obviously, a rubber band is not a formless reality, but it can be used to demonstrate the process of iterative self relation by which the formless and fundamental reality becomes progressively and relationally structured as a function of its motion relative to itself. And as you can see, each level of relational structure, once it has come into existence, is able to function as the basis for the emergence of the next level of relational structure, as that already existent level of relational structure forms a relation with itself to then produce a higher order or more highly iterated level of relational structure, all of which are composed of the same reality. And as a result of its movement in relation to itself, the formless reality that's actually there, where physical reality appears to be, evolves into a series of progressive relational structures. And because it is those relational structures that are actually there, where progressively structured physical reality only appears to be, it is those relational structures that we are actually interacting with when we interact with physical reality. And then at a specific point in its structural evolution, and specifically at the point where this particular relation begins to take place, and by this particular relation, I mean the relation whereby the formless reality that we really are becomes able to flow through and animate certain highly structured forms of itself. At that specific point in its structural evolution, for further structural evolution to take place, the reality that's actually there needed some information regarding the structured environment composed of itself in which it was operating. And so it evolved a structure that we refer to as a mind in order to produce that information. And then eventually the shit hit the fan and things started to get really complicated and dramatic because our minds work so well, produce so much information that our individualized awarenesses, as they flow through and animate the highly evolved relational structures that we perceive as our physical bodies, naturally and inevitably mistake what is only mind generated experiential information for being what's actually there, thereby obscuring from our individual awarenesses our own reality, thereby leaving us with no choice to not only mistake the universe for being experiential in nature, but to also mistake ourselves for being experiential in nature as well, thereby leaving our individual awarenesses effectively trapped in mind generated experiential environments that we are ourselves, in concert with our minds, helping to create. And the result of all that obscuring and effective entrapment of awareness is the psychological and behavioral clusterfuck that is human existence. Because in order for our individual awarenesses to operate truly functionally instead of mostly dysfunctionally while flowing through and animating these structured forms of ourself, we need to be aware of more than just the physical and mental information that is being produced by our minds, because that information is only supposed to be supplemental to our awareness of our own reality and is not supposed to be all that we are aware of. But when we mistakenly believe the experiential information that's being produced and provided by our minds to be what's actually there, then that's all that we are left to be aware of, along with emotional experience, which is also supposed to provide us with valuable structure sustaining information, but which information we have no idea how to functionally process and respond to while completely unaware of our own reality. As I said, it's a mess and it's getting messier, but it doesn't have to be that way, because the obscuring of our own reality and the effective entrapment of our awarenesses in mind generated realities, as well as the psychological suffering that inevitably follows, all exist as a function of what is nothing more than a mistaken belief that we naturally acquire and then just as naturally cling to regarding the nature of the mind generated experiential appearances. Put another way, the experiential appearances don't, by their nature, obscure the non experiential reality that's actually there. in the same way that reflections don't, by their nature, obscure whatever reflective surface is actually there. Our awarenesses are perfectly capable of being simultaneously aware of both kinds of realities, meaning the kind that's actually there and also the kind that has the ability to appear as being what's actually there, provided that we don't make the mistake of becoming aware of the kind that only appears to be what's actually there as being the reality that's actually there, because that mistake then causes that reality to function as a delusion that obscures from our awareness the reality that is actually there. Therefore, since the obscuring of the reality that's both actually there and what you really are requires that you harbor an inaccurate belief regarding the nature of the experiential realities, it follows that if you can change what you believe regarding the nature of the experiential appearances from an inaccurate belief to a more accurate belief, by understanding them to be just appearances rather than realities that are actually there, then those experiential appearances will no longer be able to function as reality obscuring delusions, thereby making it much easier for you to become directly aware of the reality that you really are than will otherwise be the case if you continue to remain mistakenly aware of the experiential appearances as being realities that are actually there. And that's why the main purpose of both the book and the series of videos I intend to make, of which this is the first, is to provide you with a rational, logical, and fact-based way of understanding reality that does not effectively force you to continue to believe that the experiential appearances in general, and physical reality in particular, are realities that are actually there where they do without question appear to be, but instead makes it possible for you to understand reality in a way that effectively forces you to let go of, or at least loosen your grip on, that mistaken belief. Because belief itself is not the problem. Instead, it is only false belief that is the problem, because it is only false belief that allows appearances to be converted by the mind into reality obscuring delusions. As I said before, the reality that we really are is perfectly capable of being simultaneously aware of both appearances and realities that are actually there, provided that we don't make the mistake of becoming aware of what is only an appearance as being the reality that's actually there. Our minds evolved the ability to produce the mental conceptual realities that we call beliefs to serve a useful purpose. And that purpose is to function as a sort of mental map that is then superimposed over the physical appearance that the mind is also producing, in order to help guide us as we navigate that physical appearance, quite similar in function to the HUDs or heads-up displays that are often employed in computer games to provide the player with additional useful information about the environment in which their character or avatar is operating. But if your HUD is giving you inaccurate information, then that information is going to be the opposite of useful. And in the same way, when your mind harbors a false belief, that information at some point becomes the opposite of useful, hindering rather than facilitating your understanding of the structured environment in which you must operate for as long as the formless awareness that you really are continues to flow through and animate the structured form of yourself that you perceive as your physical body. I do not think that it would be possible for anyone to dream up a science fiction or fantasy scenario that is more amazing and bizarre than the situation in which we are actually involved. What we really are is an uncreated, infinite, formless, timeless, and deathless reality that cannot actually be harmed in any way, that is flowing through and animating structured forms of ourself that happen to possess highly evolved minds that are also a structured form of ourself. And those minds produce detailed physical and mental appearances that we mistakenly come to believe are realities that are both actually there and what we really are. And that mistaken belief has the effect of obscuring our own reality from our awareness, leaving us with no choice but to become mistakenly aware of ourselves as being created, limited, and time-bound realities that are born and die and can be harmed in countless ways. And as a result, we live in a state of almost continuous fear. It's an absolutely amazing act of self-deception. And that act of self-deception has left us completely clueless about both the nature of reality and ourselves, and so has also left us with no awareness of the situation that we are in. Because in order to be aware of that situation, there needs to be some awareness of the reality that's actually there. But the situation is such that that reality is being completely and continuously obscured from our awareness, thereby perpetuating the situation. And as a result, here we are in the year 2023, in an age of science and technology still just as completely unaware of what we really are and of what's actually going on as we were 3,000 years ago, because we still haven't figured out that what we believe to be the reality that's actually there is just an appearance that's being produced by our minds and then superimposed by projection upon the reality that is actually there. Now, if I was to compare our situation to a science fiction scenario, I would say it most closely resembles a combination of Total Recall and The Matrix, because we've sort of voluntarily caused ourselves to forget what we really are as a result of operating from within a mind generated and so ultimately virtual reality. Except in our situation, there are no bad guys or bad machines. There's just the reality that we really are doing the crazy self destructive shit that we tend to do while our awareness is effectively trapped within a mind generated experiential environment, completely unaware of the reality that we really are as a function of being mistakenly aware of both the universe and ourselves as being a type of reality that neither it nor we actually are. In the fictional Star Trek universe, the invention of the warp drive is put forth as representing the turning point for humanity, because instead of being stuck on Earth and just getting into conflict with other human beings, humans then get to zip around faster than light speed, so they can instead get involved in conflicts with other sentient species. And that's what passes for progress. But that's not progress. It's just a fictional and more technologically advanced version of what we've actually been doing here on Earth for the past few thousand years, which is running around with our heads buried completely up our own asses while inventing technologies that we can use to get at and kill each other more efficiently. Right now, collective humanity is basically a perpetually frightened toddler that's holding a loaded gun that we keep upgrading, making it both easier to use and more effective at killing. And if we do not begin to grow up and mature as a species by beginning to develop some collective awareness of what we really are and what's going on here, it is inevitable that we will at some point end up as a species inadvertently shooting ourselves in the head. Because that's the path we've been on, and that's the path we cannot help but remain on, as long as we continue to operate in the world with absolutely no awareness whatsoever of what we really are and how we got here, and so are instead left to operate in the world on the basis of completely delusional ideas regarding what we are. And that's why the true, actual, and non fictional turning point for humanity, should it ever occur, will not be the result of some technological achievement, but will instead be the psychological achievement of our collectively seeing past the experiential delusion and so collectively becoming aware of the singular reality that's both actually there and what we really are. How can you possibly escape a cage that you don't realize is a cage because you mistakenly believe that cage to be both the world and what you are? The answer is you can't, because wherever you go and whatever you do, you take the cage with you, and so keep obscured from your awareness the very thing you need to become aware of in order to free yourself from the cage in which you don't even realize you're trapped. Which is why historically so few human beings have managed to free themselves from the experiential delusion and the suffering that being trapped in that delusion invariably produces. But we're here to throw a wrench into that self-perpetuating situation, because I put myself in the position of Morpheus, because right now you're in the position of a still trapped in the Matrix Neo, completely unaware of the situation that you're in. But thanks to the series of tubes that people refer to as the internet, I have been able to enter into your experiential reality in order to tell you that, whether you know it or not, you are unknowingly trapping your awareness in a mind-generated experiential environment that is completely obscuring from your awareness the reality that you really are. And you are suffering tremendously as a result. And I've entered your experiential reality to offer you a way out of your experiential cage and the suffering that being trapped in it inevitably produces, that involves nothing more than allowing yourself to become aware of what the reality that you really are has done and is doing to place itself in a situation where your own reality has become completely obscured from your awareness, thereby effectively trapping your awareness in a mind-generated experiential reality that is, relative to your own obscured reality, no more real than a dream. Now here's where people generally tend to lose it, saying things like, what do you mean physical reality is a dream? It's right here. I can grab it and kick it. How can it be just a dream? You're out of your fucking mind. You see, people don't like to have the actuality of experiential reality challenged, because they are so fully identified with experiential reality, so that when you challenge the actuality of experiential reality by comparing it to something as clearly unreal as a dream, they feel threatened and respond accordingly, even though it's a completely dysfunctional response because the reality they really are, as opposed to whatever set of experiential realities they mistakenly believe themselves to be, is completely untouchable and so can't actually be threatened in any way. We're all aware that dreams seem quite real while we're asleep, and the dream is all we know, until we wake up and recognize the relative unreality. And in the same way, while physically awake and aware of only the experiential appearances, they also seem quite real. But once you're able to wake up from the experiential dream by becoming directly aware of the no longer continuously obscured reality that's both actually there and what you really are, as opposed to just being conceptually aware of that reality, which is just a modified experiential dream state, you will begin to recognize the relative unreality of the experiential appearances. Even though, unlike a regular dream, once you wake up from the experiential dream, the physical and mental appearances will continue to be produced by your mind, and so you will continue to be aware of them. You just won't be mistakenly aware of them any longer as realities that are actually there. However, in order to become directly aware of the reality that's both actually there and what you really are, so that you can begin to wake up from the experiential dream, you will first need to loosen your grip on your belief in physical reality as being the reality that's actually there. Put another way, the price of escape from the experiential cage in which your awareness is presently trapping itself is the willingness to stop clinging to a false belief long enough so that a more accurate belief can enter your awareness and begin to overwrite the false belief in experiential reality that your mind is presently using to produce the experiential delusion in which your awareness has become effectively trapped. And so you have a matrix-like choice to make, but it's not a choice between taking a blue pill or a red pill. Instead, it's a choice between this and this. Relentlessly clinging to a false belief and remaining trapped in the experiential delusion that false belief is being used to produce, or loosening your grip on that false belief, and in so doing, allowing yourself to begin the process of freeing your awareness from the delusion that false belief is being used to produce. Now, here some people may be thinking, it can't be that simple, because if it were, then someone else other than this moron would have figured it out before now and told us. And many others have figured it out and then tried to tell us what's going on. But for the most part, what they tried to tell us about our situation fell on deaf ears, because we've been interpreting what they tried to tell us about what's going on from within the experiential delusion. And from within that delusion, what they try to tell us just doesn't make any sense. And so we have either ignored what they try to tell us or distorted what they try to tell us to make it fit the delusion. And when you do the latter, what you end up with is a religion. And by a religion, I mean a real religion that has as its foundational basis a true piercing of the experiential veil, as opposed to all the pseudo religions that are started by con men of various sorts in order to avoid paying taxes or so they can get laid more often. And scientists have done the exact same thing with regard to the appearance of physical reality at the quantum level as real religions have done with the valid spiritual insights upon which they are founded. And that is distort what they have been told about reality in order to make it fit the experiential delusion rather than use what they have been told about reality to escape that delusion. For over 100 years now, physical reality at the quantum level has been trying to tell scientists, hey people, I'm just a created appearance and not the reality that's actually here. That's why I appear and behave so strangely. But scientists haven't heard what physical reality is so clearly trying to tell them about its actual nature, because they continue to insist upon analyzing and interpreting the appearance of physical reality at the quantum level solely from within the context of the experiential delusion, where physical reality is assumed and believed to be in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there. And so rather than using the quantum physical appearances to figure out that physical reality is just an appearance that is in no way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there, and which understanding would take them out of the experiential delusion, they instead continue to try to make the quantum physical appearances fit into the experiential delusion, by continuing to insist that those appearances be treated as objectively existent realities, leaving them both stuck in that delusion and completely confused about what those appearances are trying to tell them about the nature of reality. And that's why context is so important, because in the absence of an accurate conceptual context, you can be told the truth all day, every day, but you're never going to understand it. Because what you're going to do instead is try to make that truth fit into the erroneous conceptual context that you already mistakenly believe to be the truth. And in so doing, you just end up distorting what you have been told, so that not only does it not help to free you from the erroneous conceptual context that you mistakenly believe to be the truth, but once distorted, it just ends up trapping you even deeper within that erroneous conceptual context, even farther from the truth than you were before you were told anything. And that's just one of the many ways that delusions perpetuate themselves once your awareness enters into one, because delusions place your awareness in a situation where you almost never question the false belief that is the basis of the delusional reality from within which you are operating. Because from within that delusional reality, the false belief that is being used to create the delusion appears to be obviously and unquestionably true, and so appears as some sort of established fact over which you have no control, when all it really is just a belief that you can let go of and change at any time. And that's just one of the reasons why, even though we have for thousands of years now been told over and over again what we really are and what's going on by people who have seen through the experiential veil and into the reality that's actually there, humanity nonetheless still remains completely stuck in the experiential delusion, completely unaware of what we really are and the situation that we're in. Language is an amazing thing, because language makes it possible for a concept that exists in one mind to be transferred to another mind without that other mind having to itself play the game of mental connect the dots in order to come up with that concept. And that's why you can go to school and in a few years learn concepts that have been produced by human minds over thousands of years. And that's why you can also, in just a few hours, learn things about the nature of reality that took me 40 years to figure out. But for language to work, two conditions have to be met. One of those conditions we are all aware of, and that is that both minds have to be running the same language software. But there's another condition that must also be met that most people are not aware of, and that condition is that for conceptual transfer to actually take place, so that the receiving awareness actually understands the concept that's being transferred, and so does not end up just being confused by it, the mind of the receiving awareness has to already possess a compatible conceptual context into which that concept can be integrated. Otherwise, all that happens is that the concept being transferred is either completely ignored because it has nowhere to go, or it is distorted in some way so that it can be fit into whatever incompatible conceptual context the receiving awareness is already operating from within. And that's why you take Biology 101 before you take Biology 102, or any 101 before any 102, because the concepts presented in the 101 course establish the conceptual context in your mind that then makes it possible for you to understand the more advanced concepts that are presented in the 102 course. Otherwise, it's like trying to pour water into a glass that's turned upside down, so that all you end up with is water and concepts everywhere, and it's a mess. That's why the purpose of this first video is not to tell in detail the whole story of how the reality that you really are got here, because that would be a waste of my time and yours, because it's very unlikely at this point in time that your mind possesses the compatible conceptual context that would make it possible for you to understand that story, because you've spent your whole life operating in conceptual context that is the exact opposite of the context in which that story takes place. Instead, the purpose of this first video is to begin to establish within your mind the conceptual context necessary to understand the story of how the reality that you really are got itself into this situation. Because in order to understand the story of how the reality that you really are got itself into this situation, you not only need to be open to the possibility that physical reality is not the reality that's actually there, but you also need to recognize that physical reality not being the reality that's actually there means that there is an entirely different reality that is actually there, functioning to produce not only physical reality, but all the experiential appearances. Because absent that compatible conceptual context, no concept that I attempt to transfer to your mind will make any sense, because it will have nowhere in your mind to go, and so will have no way of being understood. And that's why the choice with which you are faced is between this and this. Clinging to a false belief regarding the nature of physical reality and thereby remaining completely closed off to the possibility that physical reality is not the reality that is actually there, or being open to considering that possibility. Because making the first choice leaves you stuck where you are, which is with your awareness effectively trapped in a mind-generated experiential environment, completely unaware of your own reality. On the other hand, making the second choice will make it possible for you to acquire information that you can use to free your awareness from that experiential cage, because that information will make it much easier for you to become directly aware of the reality that you really are. Because that information, rather than completely and continuously denying the reality that you really are, instead continuously points toward that reality. Because the ultimate goal of all of this explaining of reality is not to provide you with a different belief regarding the nature of reality. Instead, the ultimate goal is to make it easier for you to develop the ability to become directly aware of the formless reality that you really are. And swapping your false belief in the nature of experiential reality for a more accurate belief is just a means to that end. And that's why this introductory video is primarily an attempt to get you to do this, so that there at least exists the possibility that you will understand the story of what you really are and how you got here. Because if you can understand that story, then you will have already gone a long way toward letting go of the false belief that your mind is presently using to convert the experiential appearances into reality obscuring and self-obscuring delusions. Because the only way to truly understand that story is to recognize that the experiential realities are only created appearances and not realities that are actually there. And that recognition will make it quite a bit easier for you to become directly aware of the reality that you really are than would otherwise be the case. However, that being said, the purpose of this video is not to provide you with limited information so that you then have to buy the book in order to find out the full story of what you really are and how you got here. For those of you who like to read, the book is there, and so that full story is already available. Now, obviously, one reason I'm making this video is to promote awareness of the book. However, I do not feel that people should be denied a full understanding of what they really are and how they got here just because they don't like to read. And so my intention is to make a series of videos that, taken together, will describe the nature of reality just as fully and completely as is done in the book. But that will take quite a few videos, and so will take some time, as there is quite a bit to explain and quite a bit of context that needs to be established in order to arrive at a full and complete explanation that has any chance of being understood by human beings who, as of the year 2023, remain completely trapped in an experiential dream, completely unaware of both the reality that's actually there and the reality they really are. Because even though reality beyond the physical appearance is not all that complicated, no matter how simple the concept that someone is attempting to transfer to your mind, that concept cannot be understood by your awareness unless your mind already possesses a conceptual context that is compatible with that concept. That's just how the mind works, and there's no getting around it. Now, at this point, you may be wondering, if all those other people tried to get human beings to understand what was really going on, and they weren't able to get through to us, what makes you think that your attempt to do the same will have a different outcome? And my answer to that is as follows. While those other individuals were far more fully and directly aware of the reality that's actually there than I am, and far more free from any identification with experiential reality than I am, what I have that none of them had, at least so far as I can tell, is the ability to provide human beings with a rational, logical, unified, and fact-based context that will make it possible for human beings to fully understand not only where those spiritually enlightened individuals are coming from, but also where scientific facts come from. And so what I bring to the table is context, because context is what's needed, because context has always been what's missing. We've been given all the information we need, both spiritually and scientifically, We've just never been able to make sense of it. And so we've either ignored or distorted that information, and we certainly haven't been able to reconcile the seemingly incompatible views of reality presented by spirituality and science. And so what I do is tell a story of reality that demonstrates beyond the shadow of any reasonable doubt that the two branches of human inquiry into the nature of reality that we refer to as science and spirituality are not describing two completely different and incompatible realities. Instead, what the story I tell makes clear is that what science and spirituality each describe as reality is a description that is derived from encountering two different versions of what is ultimately the same underlying and fundamental reality. Specifically, spirituality's approach to the reality that's actually there is such that, when that approach is successful, what is encountered is the unstructured version of the formless reality or formless awareness that's actually there where physical reality appears to be. On the other hand, the approach of both science and our organic physical sensors to the reality that's actually there is such that what is always encountered is some structured version of the formless reality or formless awareness that's actually there where physical reality appears to be. Now, the difference between the structured and unstructured version of the reality that's actually there is analogous to the difference between unstructured air or water and air or water that has become structured into a tornado or whirlpool as a result of what is ultimately self-relational movement. And someone else a long time ago must have realized that the fundamental reality exists in those two different states because those two states are expressed in this symbol. Except in the case of formless awareness, it's like a whirlpool emerging, and so water existing as a first level of relational structure, and then being folded upon itself an additional 3 times to produce 4 progressive levels of relational water structure, all of which are composed of different ways the same reality moving at the same speed has become stably structured as a result of its movement in relation to itself. In any case, when you encounter the unstructured version of the formless awareness that's actually there, what you become aware of is that formless awareness, which, although it can't be described, can be pointed toward, which is what all the spiritual masters have tried to do. Except we've had no compatible conceptual framework for understanding what it was they were pointing toward, stuck as we were in the experiential delusion. And so we continued to remain unaware of the singular and underlying reality they were all pointing toward using various words such as Sat Chidananda, absolute nothingness, emptiness, the kingdom of heaven, Buddha nature, the Tao, and more recently, the now. On the other hand, when science's physical sensors and our physical senses encounter the structured version of the formless awareness that's actually there where any physical reality appears to be, what we become aware of is not the uncreated and formless reality that's actually there. Instead, what we become aware of is a mind-generated reality that's completely different in nature than this uncreated, formless, and yet relationally structured reality that's actually there. And that mind-generated reality is analogous in a limited way to the line that is created where the tips of 2 fingers meet, because that mind-generated reality is created as a function of a very simple and very specific type of structural relation that takes place between two structured forms of the reality that's actually there, one of which functions as the observer reality and the other of which functions as the observed reality. And because the reality that's created exists as a function of a relation that takes place between two different relational structures, the way it appears is a function of both of those structures, and not just the structure that's functioning as the observed reality, making that reality an observer-dependent reality and not an observer-independent or objective reality. And of course, the observer-dependent, mind-generated reality that we become aware of is the created appearance that we refer to as experiential reality. Except we don't know that physical reality is just a created appearance and not a reality that's actually there, because it's created in such a way that it ends up being superimposed upon the relationally structured awareness that's actually there functioning as the observed reality, like the image of a snake being projected onto a rope, so that we end up naturally, unavoidably, and yet mistakenly believing that what's actually there is a reality that's just a created appearance. thereby completely obscuring from our awareness the reality that's actually there, functioning to produce that appearance. And so then we naturally believe that the people who have tried to tell us that what we consider to be reality is a sort of illusion, analogous to a rope that appears as a snake, to be completely full of shit, because we so firmly believe in the physical appearance as being the reality that's actually there, and so naturally believe there isn't any other reality beyond that reality. But not only is there a completely different reality beyond physical reality, it is simply the case that that completely different reality is the only reality there actually is, because all other realities are just experiential appearances of one sort or another that are being produced and then known by that reality. And so until you know that that reality exists, you can't possibly know jack shit about the nature of reality or about what you really are, no matter how many PhDs you have and no matter how good you are at driving the car of physical reality. Because until you know that that fundamental reality exists, the only realities that you can possibly know are just a bunch of mind-generated appearances that are no more real than reflections, projections, and rainbows. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow, but it's a pill that science has to swallow if science is to ever function as the instrument of self-knowledge that it's supposed to be, instead of continuing to function as it is functioning now, which is as an instrument of self-ignorance. And science is presently functioning as an instrument of self-ignorance because it continues to insist that physical reality is the reality that's actually there, and so is keeping obscure from humanity's collective awareness the fact that there is an entirely different reality actually there, where physical reality appears to be, that also just happens to be the reality that we really are. Now, one of the reasons that scientists are so hesitant to give up on the idea of an objectively existent physical reality is that they mistakenly believe that in order for physical observations to be valid, that those observations need to be objective representations of reality. Put another way, scientists don't want to give up their mistaken belief in physical reality as being in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there, because they mistakenly believe that doing so would make physical observations and so physical facts meaningless by completely untethering them from reality. But physical observations and facts remain valid and remain tethered to the reality that's actually there, even once they are known as the created observer dependent appearances that they really are, and not as the objectively existent realities they never were. And physical observations and facts remain valid and remain tethered to the reality that's actually there, even while not being objective representations of that reality, simply as a function of the way they are created. Because the only way to create a physical observation is by forming a direct impactive relation with a relational structure that's actually there, where the created physical observation then appears to be. And even though the physical observations or appearances that are produced as a result of such impactive relations are not objectively representative of the relational structures that are actually there functioning as the observed realities, the created physical appearances are not completely unrelated to those relational structures, and so provide us with information about those relational structures that has a relative validity rather than an absolute or objective validity. And that's why physical reality works, because it's a created appearance that provides us with relative information regarding the relationally structured environment composed of our own reality in which we are presently operating. And relative information is far better than no information at all, except for when you confuse that relative information for absolute information, and so end up obscuring from your awareness the reality that's both actually there and what you really are, in which case physical reality then becomes a mixed bag that, on the one hand, allows you to successfully manipulate relationally structured reality, but on the other hand, also leaves your awareness effectively trapped in a mind-generated experiential environment where you suffer tremendously. In any case, the reason science works and the reason science will continue to work, even once science finally recognizes that physical reality is just a created appearance and not in any way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there, is because physical reality cannot tell a lie as a function of the way it's created. And physical reality cannot tell a lie because you can't create a physical observation unless there's a relational awareness structure actually there for you to form a physical experience producing impactive relation with. However, although physical reality cannot tell a lie, we are perfectly capable of misinterpreting what physical reality is trying to tell us. That is, it's not physical reality's fault that we are misinterpreting the nature of the relative information it's providing us regarding the relationally structured environment in which we are operating. Because although physical reality cannot tell a lie as a function of the way it is created, our mind's mental interpretive function can lie quite freely and incessantly as a function of the way that the mental interpretations that we refer to as concepts are created. And that's because the mental appearances that we refer to as concepts, unlike physical appearances, are created in a way that does not tether them to the reality that's actually there. And that's because the way we create concepts is by using our minds to play what is nothing more than an elaborate game of connect the dots with the physical appearances that our minds are also creating. And because we can use our minds to connect the physical dots in any way we choose, we can connect the physical dots in a way that produces a concept that is accurately reflective of some situation, circumstance, or reality that actually exists. Or we can connect the physical dots in a way that produces a concept that bears no relation whatsoever to any situation, circumstance, or reality that actually exists. And as a function of humanity's mistaken belief in physical reality as being in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there, science has been and continues to connect the physical observations and facts in a way that is producing an overall conceptual image of reality that bears no relation whatsoever to any situation, circumstance, or reality that actually exists anywhere other than in the minds of those who believe what science is telling them about the nature of reality. Now, that doesn't mean that scientists are wrong about global climate change and that vaccines aren't safe, because scientists are clearly very good at driving the car of reality, thanks to the fact that physical observations and facts are tethered to the reality that's actually there as a function of their method of creation, and so remain unchanged no matter what you believe those observations and facts indicate with regard to the nature of reality. All I'm saying is that scientists don't have any idea about what's actually going on under the hood of the car they are so expertly driving, because science's materialistic interpretation of reality is complete and utter mind generated connect the dots bullshit that bears no relation to the actual nature of reality for the simple reason that that materialistic interpretation was constructed on the basis of a completely mistaken assumption regarding the nature of physical reality, and specifically it was constructed on the basis of a mistaken assumption that physical reality is in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there. Now, here some people may be thinking, or at least should be thinking, that's a pretty serious assertion. Do you have any evidence to back it up beyond pure speculation? And my answer to that is yes. I have significant scientific evidence that indicates that physical reality is not the reality that's actually there, but is just a mind generated appearance that's being superimposed by projection upon the ultimately formless and yet relationally structured awareness that's actually there, both producing and aware of all the physical appearances. And the scientific evidence I have that indicates that that is the case is the exact same evidence that science is presently using to construct its materialistic interpretation of reality. Because, as I said, physical reality cannot tell a lie, and so the facts don't change. Instead, all that changes is the way those same facts are connected based upon a different assumption regarding the nature of physical reality. What I did was take the same fundamental physical facts that science has, such as the speed of light constant, the physical characteristics of light, Einstein's relativity theories, and the seemingly bizarre appearance and behavior of physical reality at the quantum level, and then connected those same physical dots in a way that mainstream science has been unable to connect them due to its unwillingness to loosen its grip on the notion of physical objectivity. And by doing so, I was able to produce a relatively simple conceptual and visualizable model of reality that not only explains and demonstrates where all of those fundamental physical facts come from and why they exist, but also explains and demonstrates how they are all related. And so, unlike mainstream science, I don't end up with a bunch of different mathematical models and theories that, although they each seem to explain some aspect of physical reality, also contradict each other in some way and so can't quite be fit together into a unified whole. Instead, what I end up with is a relatively simple and visualizable model of reality that shows exactly how the physical facts all derive from a single, indivisible, non physical, non mental reality that has become progressively structured as a function of its movement in relation to itself. In fact, what I'm able to demonstrate is that the speed at which the fundamental reality is moving as it becomes relationally structured is not arbitrary or unknown, but is the speed of light, which is why all physical movement is inextricably linked in some way to that constant speed, simply because what all perceived physical movement actually is, beyond the physical surface appearance, is some highly iterated and relationally structured form of the speed of light movement of the fundamental reality. And as a result of that understanding, I am able to use the model to explain and demonstrate, amongst other things, exactly what time and mass actually are and why those physical characteristics must change in the way that Einstein predicted they would change when the speed of matter changes. And I also use the same model of reality to explain why physical reality appears and behaves as it does at both the macroscopic and quantum levels. Specifically, what I explain is that the way physical reality appears at both the macroscopic and quantum levels has nothing to do with the act of observation somehow magically transmuting a probabilistic physical reality into a determinate physical reality, but has only to do with a simple structural limitation that exists as a result of the fact that for any physical reality to exist, it has to be created as the product of a structural relation that takes place between two relational awareness structures, one of which functions as the observer reality and the other of which functions as the observed reality. And I'm able to explain and demonstrate not only why all of those facts and many other facts exist, but also how they are all related, because reality beyond the physical appearance is not random or probabilistic, but has a very specific structure that functions in a very specific way. And it is that specific structure and the specific way it functions that produces everything that we know as physical reality. Because what we are aware of as physical reality exists as a sort of mind generated etching of certain aspects of that structure. And so once you know what that structure is and how it functions, you can see directly not only where certain fundamental physical facts come from, but also how those facts are related to each other. Now, at this point, I want to make it clear that the model of reality that I use to explain and demonstrate why physical reality appears and behaves as it does is not an abstract mathematical model, but is a geometric and so visualizable structural model based upon the specific cellular structure of space that was first discovered by Buckminster Fuller, but which discovery has been completely ignored because it doesn't fit the materialistic model. All I did was figure out how that structure functions and how it forms a series of progressive relations with itself to produce the three additional and progressive levels of relational awareness structure that are actually there where we perceive the physical realities of light, matter, and animated matter to be. And once you understand how formless awareness becomes progressively structured as a function of its movement relative to itself, you can understand how this happens. And by this I mean how what we perceive as matter comes to be animated by the same reality out of which it is actually constructed. And once you understand what is actually taking place to produce this, you can then understand why awareness operating at this level of relational structure needed some information about the structured environment composed of itself in which it was operating, leading it to evolve a mind structure that produces two types of appearances, one of which is an externally projected physical appearance that exists as a sort of etching of relationally structured external reality, and the other of which is an internally reflected mental appearance that exists as an interpretation of the physical appearances in order to make possible, amongst other things, more functional and automated responses to external reality. However, in vast numbers of human beings, the mental appearances their minds are producing have become so completely detached and untethered from reality, due in part to the incredible amount of disinformation to which their minds have been exposed through the series of tubes known as the internet, that their mental appearances are now functioning primarily to produce increasingly dysfunctional rather than functional responses to reality. In any case, Once you understand how an individualized awareness uses a mind to produce what it becomes conscious of as physical and mental reality, you can understand how the unstructured awareness that's flowing through and animating a particular mind and body can mistake those mind generated appearances for being realities that are actually there, thereby obscuring from that individual awareness its own reality, and thereby leaving that individualized flow of awareness effectively trapped in what is nothing more than a mind generated experiential environment that it is itself helping to create, completely unaware of the reality that both it and the universe really are. The bottom line is this: science's materialistic story of reality doesn't really explain much of anything. Where does the universe come from? The Big Bang. Oh, really? What banged and why? No idea. Why does physical reality appear so weird at the quantum level but not weird at the macro level? Because physical reality at very tiny scales exists in a probabilistic state that is transmuted to a determinate state when observed. Oh, really? How does observation cause that to happen? No idea. Where does consciousness or awareness come from? Oh, it's produced by physical reality. Oh, really? How's that happen? No idea. And so you can see science expresses great certainty about certain aspects of reality that really has no explanation for at all, inasmuch as each of those so called explanations rests on something that itself has no way of being explained. And so really doesn't explain anything, but just presents the illusion of being an explanation. And what all of those so called explanations have in common is that they are all based on and derived directly from the assumption that physical reality is the reality that's actually there. And again, I'm not denying any established physical facts. I'm just denying the validity of the mental interpretations of reality that science has arrived at as a result of connecting those facts in a way that is based on the mistaken assumption that physical reality is in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there. There are no paradoxes. There are only mind generated appearances that appear paradoxical because they are being interpreted from within a conceptual context that is the opposite of the conceptual context needed to accurately interpret and understand those appearances. And once you establish in your mind the opposite conceptual context, so that you are able to operate from within that opposite conceptual context instead, what was once completely paradoxical instead becomes completely understandable. And the paradox simply vanishes because it was never actually there to begin with, but was only being inadvertently created as a result of trying to mentally interpret some reality in a conceptual context that bears no relation to the actual nature of that reality. And trying to mentally interpret a reality in a conceptual context that bears no relation to the actual nature of that reality is exactly what scientists have been doing with regard to physical reality now for over 100 years, due to their unwavering adherence to what has only ever been an unproven assumption of physical objectivity. And it just can't be done, at least not accurately, which is to say, in a way that results in a mental interpretation of physical reality that bears any relation whatsoever to the actual nature of either physical reality or reality as a whole. It would not be possible to figure out why a reflection appears and behaves as it does if you were only allowed to conceive of that appearance as being a reality that's actually there. And scientists so far haven't been able to figure out why physical reality appears and behaves as it does at the quantum level because they're only allowing themselves to conceive of that appearance as being a reality that's actually there. And that has left scientists stuck in the materialistic and probabilistic delusions, and that has left humanity stuck in our experiential delusion. Even though, thanks to science and scientists, we already possess all the information and evidence we need to fully understand that physical reality is a created appearance and not the reality that's actually there. It's just that science won't allow its practitioners to analyze and interpret that information and evidence in a conceptual context that aligns with the actual nature of physical reality, because it continues to insist that that information and evidence only be analyzed and interpreted in a conceptual context that is the exact opposite of the actual nature of physical reality. And so instead of true understanding, what is produced instead are insoluble paradoxes and inexplicable explanations. And then science throws up its hands and says, it's not my fault that physical reality at the quantum level doesn't make any sense. That's just the way it is. But that's not the way it is. It only appears that way because science continues to insist that the quantum physical dots only be connected in a conceptual context that is the complete opposite of the conceptual context that's required in order to connect those physical dots in a way that makes it possible to make perfect sense of all the physical appearances at all levels of scale, absent any insoluble paradoxes or inexplicable explanations. It's an absurd situation because, unbeknownst to them, scientists have been consigned to a sort of conceptual hell by being assigned the tasks they can't possibly ever complete because they're being effectively forced by institutional convention to work on that task from within a conceptual framework where it is simply not possible to connect the physical dots in a way that could ever result in an accurate interpretation and conceptualization of the physical facts. Physical reality isn't the reality that's actually there, and it's never going to be the reality that's actually there, regardless of the extent to which scientists both want it and believe it to be the reality that's actually there. You see, what scientists have done and continue to do with regard to their attempts to mentally interpret the appearance of physical reality at the quantum level is let their already established assumption and conception regarding the nature of physical reality determine how they connect those particular physical dots in order to arrive at what they then consider to be an accurate interpretation and conceptualization of those dots, regardless of how confusing, nonsensical, and paradox producing those explanations ultimately are. But what scientists are supposed to be doing, and what they usually do, especially when completely new and unusual information comes in that can't be understood within the present and accepted conceptual framework, is let the new physical facts guide them in the construction of a new and different conceptual framework that then allows those facts to be truly understood. That's what Darwin did, and that's all I've done. And that's all that's ever done when some breakthrough is made with regard to understanding the nature of reality. But scientists haven't been able to do that yet with regard to their conception of physical reality because scientists are human beings after all, and human beings, almost without exception, are trapped within an experiential delusion where the belief that physical reality is the reality that's actually there does not appear as just a belief, but instead appears as an established and unquestionable fact. And as a result, scientists have been treating the unproven assumption of physical objectivity as if it were an established fact that cannot and should not be questioned. And so, instead of doing what they would usually do, which is let the new facts that don't make any sense within the present conceptual framework guide them in the construction of a different conceptual framework where those new facts do make sense, they have instead chosen to remain ensconced within their present conceptual framework, where they continue to twist and contort the new facts in an effort to make them fit into that framework in a way that seems to make some sense. And it hasn't worked yet, and it's never going to work because you can't get there from where they are, because they are operating from within a conceptual framework that is the exact opposite of the conceptual framework you need to be operating from within in order to make sense of both relatively new quantum physical facts as well as physical reality as a whole. And so, to be clear, the probabilistic framework the scientists came up with to try to explain the appearance of physical reality at the quantum level is not a totally new conceptual framework, because that probabilistic framework has as its basis the already existing idea that physical reality is in some way, shape, or form the reality that's actually there. The probabilistic framework is just a modification of the already existing objective framework that was constructed as a sort of addition to that objective framework in a desperate effort to try to explain the wave and particle appearances of physical reality in a way that would allow scientists to continue to believe that physical reality was in some way an objective or observer independent reality, even though the appearance of physical reality at the quantum level was clearly able to completely change from one type of physical reality to the opposite type of physical reality, depending on how it was looked at. Basically, scientists did the best they could to come up with an explanation for the wave and particle appearances of physical reality that seemed to make sense from within the objective conceptual framework from within which they were all being effectively forced to operate. Because what they couldn't bring themselves to do was to completely step out of that objective conceptual framework, even though doing so would have made it possible for them to arrive at the somewhat obvious conclusion that physical reality completely changes in appearance depending on how it is looked at, because physical reality is not an objective or observer independent reality, but is instead a reality that is being created as a function of a relation that takes place between an observer reality and an observed reality. And they couldn't bring themselves to step out of that objective conceptual framework, and still can't bring themselves to step out of that objective conceptual framework, because they, like almost every other human being on the planet, remain completely trapped in an experiential delusion, where the belief that physical reality is the reality that's actually there does not appear as just a belief, but instead appears as an undeniable and indisputable fact. But because physical reality isn't an objective or observer independent reality, the conceptual framework that you need to be operating from within in order to accurately connect the quantum physical dots in a way that actually explains why a single type of observed physical reality can appear as either a wave or particle can't just be a modification of the objective framework, but instead has to be a conceptual framework that is the complete opposite of the objective framework. And that's why I say that scientists are operating from within a conceptual framework that is the exact opposite of the conceptual framework they need to be operating from within in order to truly explain and make sense of both the relatively new quantum physical facts as well as physical reality as a whole. In the book, I refer to such situations as conceptual clusterfucks. And that's because in a regular clusterfuck, what you end up with is a physical mess. Whereas in a conceptual clusterfuck, what you end up with is a conceptual mess that takes the form of a proliferation of incomplete and contradictory theories and stories that attempt to make sense of something from within a conceptual context where it's just not possible to do so. And that's how true spiritual insights have been turned into the conceptual clusterfucks that we know as religions, as human beings have attempted in vain to accurately interpret true spiritual insights from within the experiential delusion. And that's also how the relatively new physical observations made at the quantum level have been turned into the conceptual clusterfuck that is the probabilistic interpretation of quantum theory, as human beings have attempted in vain to accurately interpret those new physical observations and facts while operating from within the same experiential delusion. Now, here it may seem that I'm taking a big dump on both religion and science, but that's not really the case. I have great respect for both true religions and science. And again, by true religions, I mean those that have as their foundational basis an individual or individuals who had some direct awareness of the formless reality that's actually there where physical reality appears to be. Both true spiritual insights and physical facts have as their basis relations that we are able to form with what is ultimately the same fundamental reality. It's just a matter of whether you are forming a relation with the unstructured version of that reality, in which case you then become aware of that reality directly as it is, or whether you are forming a relation with some relationally structured version of that same reality, in which case what you then become aware of is not that reality as it is, because what you instead become aware of is an entirely different sort of reality that is produced as a product of that structural relation, and which entirely different reality is always just an appearance and never a reality that's actually there. And so, true religions and science are both valid methods of inquiry into the nature of reality because each derives its own particular set of facts from the reality that's actually there. The problem is that those two branches of human inquiry into the nature of reality both continue to misinterpret the facts they have been given as a function of the experiential delusion. And as a result, those facts, instead of being used to free humanity from the experiential delusion, are instead being used in a way that is keeping humanity trapped in that delusion. And so here I would like to point out to atheists, as smug and arrogant as they often are, stating in one way or another, I don't believe in all that religious gobbledygook because I believe in the facts of science. Is that what you believe in are not facts? Because what you believe in is actually just a particular way the facts of science have been assembled to produce a particular conceptualization of reality. And the fact is, the conceptualization of reality that science continues to present to humanity as the way things are is just as made up and completely inaccurate as any religious version of reality has ever been. Because the physical facts science uses to produce its materialistic conception of reality have all been connected to each other based on an assumption regarding the nature of those facts that could not possibly be more inaccurate. So rather than believing in spiritually based gobbledygook, you believe in fact based gobbledygook instead. but it's still just gobbledygook. You just believe it's not gobbledygook because it's gobbledygook constructed by inaccurately connecting and interpreting physical facts rather than by inaccurately connecting and interpreting spiritual realizations. And if there was a contest to decide which conceptually clusterfucked version of reality was more accurate, religion's view or science's view, at this point religion would win because religion at least recognizes that there is a more fundamental reality that exists beyond the physical appearance, whereas science keeps trying to tell us that physical reality is all there is, and science in that regard could not possibly be more incorrect. Because not only is physical reality not all there is, physical reality isn't even actually there at all because it's just an appearance that's being superimposed upon the ultimately formless and yet relationally structured reality that is actually there. And so the fact is, because conceptualization or belief is not just about having physical facts, but is really about how those facts are connected to each other to produce the mental realities that we refer to as concepts, you can have all the facts you want. And those facts can be the most accurate facts in the history of the universe. But if you continue to insist that those facts can only be connected to each other in a way that aligns with the concept, belief, or assumption that is itself completely inaccurate, then you have left yourself with no choice but to churn out, believe in, and become caught up in conceptual realities that cannot themselves ever be anything other than completely inaccurate. And that's why I'm all about establishing accurate conceptual contexts. Because no matter how smart and how clever you are, if the conceptual context from within which you are operating is inaccurate, then you have no choice but to connect whatever facts you have in an inaccurate way. That's just how our minds work, and there's no getting around it. On the other hand, if the conceptual context from within which you are operating is accurate, the facts just tend to fall into place and sort of align themselves, revealing without much effort how they're actually connected to each other. And so my function, as I see it, is to provide human beings with the opportunity to relocate from the desert to the beach so they can more easily access the ocean of reality that they really are, and which reality they are presently, for the most part, completely unaware of. And I use that analogy because both deserts and beaches are made of sand and neither is the ocean. But one is certainly closer to the ocean than the other, and so living there just makes it easier to get into the ocean. And in the same way, my relatively accurate awareness-based conception of reality and humanity's completely inaccurate physical-based materialistic conception of reality are both just mind-generated concepts, and so are both just appearances, and so neither is the ocean of reality that you really are. However, it is simply the case that it is much easier to become directly aware of the reality that you really are while operating from within an accurate conception of reality that continuously points toward that reality than it is while operating from within an inaccurate conception of reality where that reality is either being continuously and completely obscured from your awareness or being conceived as some sort of lesser or derivative reality. And because the ultimate goal of all of this explaining of reality is not just to swap a completely inaccurate belief for a more accurate belief, but is to make it easier for you to become directly aware of the formless reality that you really are, so that you can free your awareness from the mind-generated experiential environment in which your awareness is presently effectively trapped, I'm going to begin to wrap up this introductory video by making a referral. Because you don't have to wait until you have acquired full information about the nature of reality to become directly aware of the reality that you really are. That information is helpful and it can facilitate that process, but it is by no means absolutely necessary. You already have the ability to become directly aware of the reality that you really are by the virtue of the fact that you are that reality. All that you presently lack is someone to show you how it's done and how simple and easy it is to do. But that someone is not me, because that's not my thing. My thing is conceptual relocation, so you can more easily follow the guidance of the people whose thing it is to show you how it's done. And while there are no doubt quite a few of those people out there, I'm only aware of one that I know with absolute certainty does that kind of thing because he's the individual who showed me how it's done. And that individual goes by the name of Eckhart Tolle. Now, Eckhart Tolle has never heard of me and has no idea who I am. And that's fine, because what's important is that I know who he is. And what's even more important is that I know what he is. And what he is a living Buddha. Now, that's not as big of a deal as you may think it is, although it is a big deal, although just not in the way you probably think it is. He's not special or better than or more than or greater than. He's the same reality you are, which is also the same reality that everything else actually is as well. He's just that reality existing in a state of continuous self awareness, and you're that same reality existing in a state of continuous self unawareness. That's all. Basically, Tolle is an individual who has become completely free of any identification with mind generated experiential reality, and as a result is able to remain continuously aware of the only reality that's not just an appearance, while still functioning in the world, and so while still aware of experiential reality. And so Tolle is just doing what everybody else is already capable of doing but isn't doing, because we're all caught up in our minds, identified with mind generated forms that are completely different in nature than the reality that we really are, which then causes us to pay no attention whatsoever to the reality that we really are, and which reality is both within us and all around us, but is being obscured from our awareness by the mind generated appearances we mistakenly believe to be absolutely real, all that is real, and what we really are. And because Tolle is directly aware of that reality and has no identification with experiential reality, he is able to guide other individual awarenesses to a direct awareness of that reality. That's his thing. And so my recommendation is that you watch one of his videos on YouTube and see if you can become aware of what it is that he is always pointing toward. I'll post a link to one or more of his videos below this video. Now, I should mention that for his pointing to have any chance of working, you need to watch without being externally distracted. You will already be internally distracted by the thoughts going through your head, but he will help walk you through that level of distraction, because that's what he does. And the other thing I'll mention is, don't make the mistake that I made for 20 years while trying to become directly aware of the fundamental reality, until I happened across a Tolle video by accident one day, which is to expect the direct awareness of the fundamental reality to be some sort of explosion that immediately sweeps away all delusion, because that's not how it generally works. And expecting the direct awareness of the fundamental reality to come in the form of some dramatic experience only functions to keep it hidden. The direct awareness of the fundamental reality is a subtle thing, because it is formless after all, but it's there. And so it's a reality that you can turn your conscious attention toward and become aware of once you're not being continuously distracted by mind generated experiential reality. And that's all I'll say about that. Now, one final thing I'm going to mention before I bring this video to a close is that earlier I gave scientists shit for failing to even consider the possibility that the unproven assumption of physical objectivity is incorrect. However, I want to give credit where credit is due. About a year and a half ago, after I had just finished the first draft of the book, a friend of mine sent me a link to a YouTube video where a scientist was being interviewed who had written a book titled The Case Against Reality. And I watched enough of that video to understand that he was making the case that he has come across evidence that indicates that physical reality is not the reality that's actually there, but is a purely mind-generated reality that is wholly different from whatever reality is actually there. Now, I must admit that I didn't read his book because I was finishing my own book that makes the same argument, but also explains in detail how the reality that is actually there makes all this happen. But still, kudos to him, because he has figured out what most other scientists still refuse to even consider as a possibility. And so he's light years ahead of most other scientists. I'm not an institutional scientist, and so it's easy for me to go off the reservation and look at reality in a way that mainstream science presently considers taboo. But it's not easy for an institutional scientist to do that, because scientists do not like being told that they are wrong about something that is so fundamental to their conception of reality that it undercuts and takes off the table almost everything that they presently believe or assume regarding the nature of reality. And so I'll post a link to the YouTube video of his interview so you can check it out if you feel so inclined. In any case, the ball is now in your court, and you can choose to begin to wake up from the experiential dream, or you can go on completely caught up in that dream. And either way is fine, because either way you will remain the same uncreated reality that you have always been and always will be. The only difference is whether you will experience that dream as being enjoyable or as being the opposite of enjoyable. And that's why becoming conceptually aware of the nature of reality is not an intellectual exercise, but is ultimately a quality of life issue. And that's because flowing through and animating a highly evolved fourth level relational structure simply becomes more enjoyable once you develop the ability to become directly aware of the reality that you really are, so that your individualized awareness is no longer continuously trapped in your mind, inadvertently caged by experiential realities as a result of conferring upon those appearances a level of reality and actuality that they do not and never will possess. When the experiential dream is all you know, it's mostly a nightmare. But when it's known as it actually is, which is as just a bunch of mind generated appearances that come and go within the reality you really are, that changes completely. Although things will still happen that you would have preferred have not happened or to have happened differently. It's just that while directly aware of the reality that you really are, you have the ability to view those unwanted events from a perspective that does not cause you to reflexively use your mind in a way that produces more unwantedness. Becoming directly aware of the reality that you really are is not about getting things to always go your way. It's more about being able to remain peaceful and at ease regardless of how things go. It's simply the case that the more peaceful and at ease you are, the more likely it is that things will go the way you want them to go, which is fine. And if they don't, that's fine as well, because either way, you continue to know yourself to be the undying and untouchable reality out of which the entire universe is constructed and composed. And so, from that perspective, nothing that happens experientially, one way or the other, is really that big of a deal. As Tolle would put it, events continue to have a relative importance, but they are no longer seen as being absolutely important, because the only thing of absolute importance is that you remain to some degree directly aware of the formless reality that you really are, so that your awareness doesn't end up once again completely and continuously trapped in a completely delusional, mind-generated experiential environment where you will inevitably experience a tremendous amount of psychological suffering that you would not experience if your awareness was not effectively trapped in that environment. Now, one last thing I want to mention before I end this, and this really is the last thing, is that once you realize and see clearly that all of this, beyond the physical surface appearance, is actually just a single indivisible reality that has formed a series of progressive relations with itself, and so see clearly that we really are all one, what also then becomes completely clear is that all sex is really just a form of masturbation. That's just how it is. I don't make up the facts, I just connect and interpret them as accurately as I can. And on that note, I will bid you adieu. And until next time, namaste.